October 11th, 2019, 6:42 p.m. rain hammered the treetops of Kellerman Ridge, and somewhere in that storm-soaked wilderness, a lone researcher was running for his life. His breath was sharp. His boots carved deep tracks through the mud as he clutched a weatherproof case inside it, evidence he was never meant to see. Behind him, the forest shifted. A branch snapped. Then another, too heavy to be an animal, too controlled to be random. Elias Calderon didn't dare look back. He knew eyes were following him, silent, trained, patient. Lightning cracked across the ridge, revealing a clearing ahead, and what he saw there stopped him cold. He whispered one word into the wind, barely louder than the storm. No, not again. The rain had not stopped for 3 days when Elias Calderon stepped off the supply truck and into the soaked gravel of Bitterroot Field Station. The air carried that cold, metallic smell the Cascades held after long storms. He checked his pack once more: cameras, audio drives, field journal, then pulled his hood tight and walked toward the tree line without looking back. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent half his life in deep forest. Elias wasn't a hobbyist. He was a trained wildlife surveyor and seasonal field technician for the North Pacific Environmental Service, a job that had sharpened his tracking and backcountry survival skills for over 13 years. What drove him this time wasn't work. It was a private research project, a 3-week investigation into reported night structures and unexplained bipedal movement patterns near the Kellerman Ridge wilderness, a region avoided by hikers and ignored by officials. Elias never chased rumors, only patterns, and the patterns here had troubled him for months. He filed all the required permits, logged his coordinates, noted his 3 base camp rotation schedule. If anything went wrong, the ranger station would know his last known point. He followed every rule he had written for others. He hiked in for 2 days, the canopy closing above him like a vault. On the morning of the 3rd day, he reached his first camp, set along a narrow saddle where fog traveled low across the ground. He placed his trail cameras in a tight arc, a method head tested for years to capture anything crossing through a travel corridor. The forest around Kellerman Ridge was dense enough to swallow sound. Even a shifted stone seemed louder than it should. On his 2nd night, Elias woke to a single sharp crack wood on wood somewhere near the north slope. Could be wind, could be elk jaw snapping a branch. He wrote it down without comment. Each morning, he moved deeper into the grid he had mapped out at home. He worked quietly, leaving almost no trace. His trail recorder captured faint groans of shifting trees and faraway echo calls that he marked as unclassified. Nothing suggested danger. Nothing felt wrong. Not yet. On the 6th day, he discovered a pattern of broken understory, large prints, but undefined. The spacing was wide, the direction straight downhill. He took plaster molds, photographed each angle, and noted that the impressions were heavy but sharp, as if the weight had been directed with intention. That night, something passed near camp. It did not stop. Just a slow, steady tread, far heavier than the usual night creatures Elias heard in his work. His hand hovered over the zipper of his tent, frozen between instinct and discipline. He didn't move. He only listened. By morning, the forest felt different still, but not silent. As if something had briefly crossed into his field of study, then vanished, before leaving meaning behind. This sharpened his attention. He doubled his camera coverage. He set audio traps near the ridge. His notes grew more precise. On the 10th day, the storm returned. A rolling gray wall swallowed the ridge, bending the treetops and filling the valleys with water. Elias pushed on, determined to reach the far drainage where earlier reports had originated. He hiked through sleet and clay until his boots felt like anchors. Then he found something unexpected: deep tire ruts carved into a slope that should have been inaccessible. The tracks were fresh within 2 days at most, cutting through an area classified as roadless. Heavy vehicles, more than one. Elias crouched, gloved fingers touching the churned mud. The shape wasn't from Forest Service rigs. It looked industrial. He followed the ruts until they disappeared into a thicket of cedar. A narrow path had been cut by something large, branches trimmed high enough for a truck to pass. He scanned for camera angles, but the storm hammered the trees too hard for proper placement. He marked the coordinates and stepped back. That night, he made a short audio entry. His voice was calm, but the edges were tight. Unmapped access route discovered. Tracks indicate heavy machinery, not logging equipment. We'll check lower basin for signs. He didn't elaborate. Elias never theorized in the field, only collected. The next morning, a thick chemical smell drifted through the rain, acrid, metallic, unlike anything natural. He traced it downhill to a shallow ravine. At the base, half buried under mud, he saw the curved rim of a container, blue, industrial grade, the kind used for storage of solvents. He wiped the surface with his sleeve. No markings remained. Someone had scraped them clean. His heartbeat picked up, but his movements stayed controlled. He photographed the area, logged the soil texture, and scraped a small sample for testing. Then he noticed something else. Faint footprints near the barrel. Human. 2 sets. Both recent. He backed away carefully, checking every angle of the tree line. Nothing moved, nothing watched, but the hairs on his arms lifted as if the forest itself were holding breath. Elias shifted to his second camp that evening, 3 miles southeast. The path was slick, forcing slow progress. At camp, he reviewed camera data. 1 unit had been disturbed. The angle had shifted by almost 20 degrees. He checked the timestamp. Late afternoon, while he was at the ravine. Someone had approached his gear, someone confident enough to get close. He sat still for a long time, rain tapping lightly on the tarp overhead. Then he typed a brief message into his satellite device, his last scheduled check-in with the station. All equipment deployed. Movement near Zone 3. Will document further. Short. Neutral. No mention of barrels or tire ruts. Not until he knew more. On the 13th day, the rain broke. A thin sun edged through the clouds, turning the wet forest silver. Elias moved toward the lower basin, an isolated pocket where sound traveled strangely. The ground softened under his boots as he crossed a small stream. That was when he noticed them. Deep tracks. Not animal, not recreational. These were the imprints of triple-axle trailers, heavy, reinforced, used for bulk transport. The tracks led toward a narrow cut in the hillside that officially did not exist. He stepped through. The forest opened into a small clearing, hidden under layers of cedar and fir, and in the center of the clearing stood a cluster of barrels, sealed, stacked, and partially buried under camouflaged netting. The chemical smell here was overpowering, sharp enough to sting the sinuses. Elias raised his camera, his breath slow, deliberate. He circled each cluster, documenting angles. He captured the gouges in the soil where containers had been dragged, the boot prints around them, the direction of vehicle entry. The wind shifted. Someone had been here very recently. He lowered the camera and scanned the ridge above. No movement, no voices, only that low hum of air pressing through wet branches. But he felt it pressure, like an unseen presence waiting behind the tree line. He withdrew, step by step, careful not to snap a branch. His mind ran through possibilities, but he kept his face neutral, breath even. He didn't want panic stored in the audio logs. At camp that night, he didn't light a fire. He checked the perimeter twice. On the second pass, he found something new. A single boot print, large, fresh, right at the edge of his camp. He stared at it in silence. Then he looked deeper into the dark timber, where the ground turned black, and the branches formed a wall of teeth-like silhouettes. Someone was watching, and they were close. The boot print stayed on Elias' mind as dawn leaked through the trees, thin and pale. He packed quietly, every movement controlled. His eyes kept drifting toward the ridge, where the forest thickened into a wall of shadow. He moved camp within the hour, cutting southeast along a series of narrow shelves carved by centuries of rain. The air was colder today, heavy with that metallic smell again. Something upstream was bleeding chemicals into the soil. Elias followed the contour lines down to a small basin shaped like an open palm. Water pooled in pockets between ferns, tinted faintly green. He dipped a test strip into one of the pools. The reagent turned dark in seconds, far beyond safe limits. He logged the reading without commentary, then kneeled in the mud to collect a sample. His gloves came away with a gritty sheen, almost oily. "Not natural," he whispered, the words barely audible in the open air. He scanned the tree line again. The silence was different now, stretched, heavy, expectant. Even the birds kept their distance. Elias tightened his pack and moved deeper into the basin, following the faint smell of solvents on the wind. The ground sloped toward a collapsed drainage tunnel, half swallowed by roots and moss. It looked abandoned, rust flaking from the metal frame, but the soil around it told a different story, drag marks, recent, leading down into darkness. He raised his camera, 2 quick shots, then he crouched low and studied the tunnel. A thin plume of vapor drifted out, almost invisible, shimmering in the light like heat above asphalt. He didn't enter. He documented. Always document first. He skirted the entrance and climbed a narrow bank to check the upper ridge. The vantage point revealed a pattern in the forest, a channel cut through the trees, too straight to be natural, too narrow for public vehicles. It ran like a scar through the timber. Elias followed it uphill. The deeper he went, the clearer the track became. Branches trimmed high, brush pushed aside, soil compressed under repeated weight. Whoever cut this route had been using it for years. Halfway up the ridge he found a tarp-matted rectangle of earth, flat, compact, and marked by twin grooves spaced exactly 8 feet apart. A staging point, a loadout zone. Something big had been parked here. He crouched, touching the soil. Cooler than expected. Recent shade from a large vehicle. The storm might have washed away much of the evidence, but not the pattern. Heavy machinery had rested here in the last 48 hours. A faint crack echoed through the forest wood splitting somewhere behind him. Elias froze, breath sharp in his chest. Another crack, then silence. He waited, letting the wind fill the space where sound had been. He retreated carefully, 1 step at a time, never showing his back to the trees. When he reached the channel, he ducked low and moved quickly downhill, mind racing through contingencies he had practiced but never needed until now. Back at camp, he found another disturbance. One of his audio traps had been pulled from the tree, the wire snapped clean. The recorder lay in the moss, undamaged but clearly handled. Whoever had been near him last night wanted him to know. He lifted the device to his ear. The LED still blinked. He pressed play. Static. Wind. A distant branch break. Then footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Circling. At one point, the steps stopped directly in front of the microphone. No breathing. No shifting. Just presence. He closed his hand around the recorder, jaw tight. This wasn't random. Whoever was following him understood his equipment, possibly knew his schedule. They had been tracking him longer than he realized. By afternoon, the clouds rolled back in, dark and full. Elias needed higher ground for a secure vantage point. He climbed toward the granite spine that cut across the ridge like a broken knife. Each step carried the weight of a decision he hadn't yet made. Report now, or gather more. He reached a narrow ledge overlooking a hidden valley. From up here, the forest looked untouched, pristine, untamed. But at the far edge of the valley, between 2 folds of terrain, he saw something out of place, straight lines, faint but visible. He zoomed his lens. Barrels, rows of them. 9, 10, more likely 12. All covered under brush nets. An operation this size required logistics, trucks, people, routes, knowledge of enforcement schedules. He clicked photo after photo, each one stamped with GPS coordinates. Each angle carefully framed. At the edge of one shot, he caught movement, a figure slipping behind a cedar, barely a blur. Not animal, human. He exhaled slowly and lowered the camera. Time to relocate again. The descent was fast, too fast. Elias slid twice in loose soil, catching himself on roots slick with rain. He kept his breathing steady, forcing the instinctive panic back down into something usable. The forest darkened earlier than expected, but he pushed on until he reached a narrow fault cut by an old landslide. It offered cover from the ridge and a defensible angle. He built a small, silent camp. No fire, no visible line of approach. He placed 2 cameras, facing opposite directions. As night settled, he reviewed the day's images under a red light filter. The barrels, the staging area, the tracks, the tunnel. Piece by piece, the pattern formed. This wasn't sporadic dumping. It was a coordinated route designed to move toxic waste into hidden pockets of the wilderness. And the deeper he went, the clearer the structure became. Somewhere far off, A low rumble traveled through the soil. He paused, listening. Not thunder, machinery. Heavy, slow, moving through the ridge corridor he had followed earlier. He waited until the vibrations faded, then opened his field journal and wrote a single line. Whoever is running this knows the land better than the agencies meant to protect it. Sometime after midnight, a faint glow flickered through the branches, headlights, muted by distance and rain. Elias crawled forward on his stomach, peeking over the fallen logs at the edge of the fault. Downhill, a truck moved through the trees without any markers. A flatbed with covered cargo. Two figures walked alongside it, guiding it with handheld lamps. They moved with practiced precision, as if this was routine. He filmed 30 silent seconds, enough to prove activity, not enough to identify faces. The truck turned hard left, disappearing behind a curtain of firs. A few minutes later, only rain remained. Elias stayed awake until dawn. Sleep never came. The forest never relaxed. When morning light finally reached his camp, he found a small stone placed on top of his pack. Smooth, wet. Not from his gear. Someone had been within arm's reach while he slept. His pulse tightened, but his hands stayed steady. He picked up the stone, turned it over, then set it aside. A message delivered without words. We know where you are. He packed faster than before, tightening every strap, silencing every zipper. He needed distance, a new angle, a place they wouldn't expect him to go. He headed north, toward a region marked on his map only as Burn Scar 12, a section damaged by an old wildfire, rarely monitored, difficult to navigate. He figured the high visibility would reduce ambush risk. The open ground might give him a chance to break the pattern of pursuit. Half a mile in, the forest thinned, and the ground turned gray with ash. Trees stood like tall, charred bones, pointing to a pale sky. Elias slowed, scanning for movement. Here, nothing could hide easily. Or so he thought. At the center of the burn scar, he found something unexpected. A shallow pit. Man-made. Fresh. Ash displaced in a near-perfect oval. And beside it, tire tracks again, but sharper, cleaner, as if the vehicles had been deliberately routed through the clearing to erase their previous paths. He knelt and touched the edge of the pit. The soil was still warm. Something had been burned here within the last 12 hours. But not wood, something else. He leaned closer. Black flecks, melted plastic, ruined metal fragments, the remains of electronics. A memory unit. A shattered housing of what looked like a transport GPS module. Someone had destroyed evidence. Quickly, and recently. Elias stood slowly, turning full circle. The burn scar stretched wide around him, open to the sky. But now he felt exposed, as if every blackened trunk hid 100 watching eyes. His satellite device vibrated against his hip, a signal weak but present. He checked the screen. A new message. No sender, just 4 words. Stop following the trail. He stared at it for several seconds. The device wasn't compromised. No one had physical access. Someone had piggybacked the signal. Someone sophisticated. Someone confident enough to send a warning instead of a threat. Because they assumed he would listen. Elias powered the device off, heart pounding but face calm. Rain started again. Light at first, then heavier, cold needles on skin. He tightened his strap, stepped out of the burn scar, and walked toward deeper forest. His mission had changed. His perimeter had changed. Everything had changed. But he kept moving. Because now, he wasn't documenting rumors. He was documenting a crime. And the criminals were watching every step. Elias pushed deeper into the forest, the burn scar fading behind him like a warning he chose not to heed. The rain softened into a gray mist, drifting between the branches in long ribbons. Every sound, every drip, every shift of bark felt sharper now. He moved north, toward an unmarked ridge tucked between 2 canyons. Few people traveled here. The terrain was unstable, crumbling underfoot from decades of erosion. That made it the perfect place to hide something no one wanted found. By midday, the forest opened into a narrow shelf overlooking a deep ravine. Fog crawled along the bottom like a slow creature trying to escape. Elias crouched and studied the land. Something about the symmetry below straight edges, unnatural angles caught his eye. He raised his lens. There, half concealed by undergrowth, were rows of stacked containers. Not barrels this time. Hard-shell crates, the kind used for industrial transport. Some were cracked open. Some were still sealed. He zoomed further. Symbols, hazard designations. Partial labels burned away by weather. One crate had a large black smear running across its surface, like someone tried to torch it but stopped halfway. He photographed everything, each shot precise. The clearing wasn't large, maybe 60 yards across. But it was organized, intentional. A depot. As he reviewed the images, a voice rose behind him, low, firm, close enough that he felt the vibration before the sound. Turn around, slowly. Elias didn't reach for his knife or the camera. He lifted his hands and rotated carefully. A tall man stood 10 feet away, jacket soaked, face shadowed under a hood. He held no weapon, but his stance was one of practiced readiness. "You shouldn't be here," the man said. His voice carried no anger, only inevitability. Elias kept his posture neutral. "I'm documenting environmental violations for an independent survey." The man stepped forward once. "That's the problem." For a moment, the forest held its breath. Rain pattered softly on dead needles. Elias searched for an opening, not to run, but to understand. The man exhaled. "Come with me. If you stay out here alone, you won't last another day." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement made from knowledge, not malice. Elias studied him. No insignia, no gear, no radio. Just a damp jacket, boots worn at the toes. "Who are you?" Elias asked. The man hesitated. "Someone who's been trying to stop this longer than you've been tracking it." He motioned to the east. A narrow path cut through the brush, barely visible. Against better judgment, but guided by instinct, Elias followed. They moved quietly along the ridge, stepping around fallen branches and soaked roots. After 20 minutes, the man led him to a hollow between two boulders. Inside, hidden from overhead sightlines, sat a small tarp shelter and a scatter of field notebooks. The man knelt and unzipped a pouch. "Name's Marcus Hale," he said. "I worked for the Crosswind Resource Bureau, Enforcement Division. I tried to shut this operation down 12 years ago." Elias kept his distance, but listened. Hale pulled out a thin binder, edges warped from moisture. "Everything you've seen, the barrels, the crates, the tunnels, it's all one system. A pipeline, not mining, not logging. Full-scale toxic disposal across 3 counties. Elias flipped through a few pages. Handwritten maps, photos printed years ago, enforcement memos with redacted signatures. Hale spoke slowly, as if choosing each word. "We found early sites back in 2012, filed reports, requested full investigation. 2 months later, my partner vanished, hiking in this exact region. Case closed as accidental." Elias looked up. "They silenced him?" "They silenced 5 people," Hale corrected, "all tied to environmental oversight. After the second death, I stopped pushing. After the third, I went off-grid entirely." He clasped his hands, knuckles white. But they didn't stop. They learned to hide better. Rain tightened into a steady curtain around them. Elias felt the weight of the truth in Hale's voice, heavy, rooted, real. This wasn't rumor. This wasn't speculation. Elias' photos were just the newest layer on top of a decade of buried evidence. Hale leaned forward. "I've been tracking unusual transport routes, new drivers, additional loads. And then last week," he reached into the binder and pulled out a printed satellite image. A long scar of disturbed soil snaked across a remote ridge, visibly fresh. "Their operation expanded," Hale said. "Bigger trucks, cleaner routes, heavier waste." Elias studied the photo. "Why now?" Hale looked toward the trees as if expecting someone to appear. "Because someone started asking questions again. Someone who knows how to document properly. Someone they can't mislead with fake tracks and staged noise." Elias understood immediately. "They're watching me." "Since day 3, Hale said. "Probably earlier." A coldness spread through Elias' chest. He thought back to the disturbed cameras. The stone on his pack. The message on his satellite device. Hale zipped the binder shut. "They want you afraid enough to leave. But if you stay, if you keep following the trail," he shook his head, "they'll do what they did to the others." Elias didn't respond. He couldn't. The truth had been circling him for days, but hearing it spoken aloud fixed it in place like a nail driven into timber. Hale rose and gestured toward a narrow exit between the rocks. There's something else you need to see. Something that proves intent, not negligence, not sloppiness. Intent. They hiked downhill, following a cut in the ridge carved by ancient runoff. The further they descended, the quieter the forest became. Even the rain seemed to hush. After 15 minutes, Hale stopped beside a fallen cedar. He brushed aside moss and revealed a small metal hatch, edges rusted from long exposure. The lock had been snapped years ago. "This used to be a survey cache left by the Bureau," Hale said, "but someone repurposed it." He swung the hatch open. Inside lay a stack of waterproof envelopes, thick, labeled, sealed, each bearing hand-scribed dates. Elias pulled one out carefully. It contained transport manifests, routes, weights, delivery points. The dates spanned 12 years. "This is their ledger," Hale said. "Proof that this wasn't accident or neglect. This was a structured criminal operation. Coordinated. Protected." Elias scanned the pages. Every line incriminated someone, more than someone, dozens. He felt the weight of the evidence settle into his hands. Heavy, undeniable, lethal. A distant crack echoed through the trees. Not a branch, not thunder, something sharper. Hale stiffened. They're close. Elias stuffed the ledger into his pack, cinched the straps tight. Hale grabbed his arm. "Listen to me. If they catch us together, neither of us walks out. We split. You go west. Stay in the gullies. Stay below ridgeline." "And you?" Elias asked. "Ill. Draw them off. I'm better used as bait than a target." Elias shook his head. "You won't make it." Hale gave a faint, tired smile. "I haven't made it in 12 years. I've just lasted longer than they expected." Another crack. This one closer. Hale pushed Elias toward the trees. "Move. Now." Elias sprinted downhill, dodging roots, sliding through mud. Branches snapped behind him, quick, intentional footsteps. Not chasing, tracking. He cut west, dropping into a narrow ravine. The walls rose steep on both sides, offering cover. He paused only long enough to steady his breath. Another sound filtered through the canopy. Voices. Low, muffled, disciplined, not panicked, not angry. Professional. He moved again, faster this time, deeper into the ravine. The slope carried him toward a washed-out creek bed. The muddy water soaked his boots instantly, but he kept moving, staying low. Then the sharp boom of something heavy, collapsing, echoed far behind him. A tree? A struggle? Or Hale? Elias forced the thought back and pushed harder. As he crossed the creek, he saw something ahead, a flicker of metal between the brush. A small structure. Low, half-buried. A shack. Not on any map. He approached slowly, camera in hand. Mud coated the bottom edges, but the door was intact. The lock had been broken recently. Inside, humidity clung to the air. Shelves lined the walls. Old gear, tools, paperwork, and on the back table, spread neatly, sat an array of printed photographs. His photographs. Every angle he had taken. Every camp he had stayed at. Someone had been shadowing him with a better vantage point, logging his movement from day one. At the center of the table lay a single page. Fresh ink, typed. Calderon. "Stop, before you end up like Hale." Elias stared at the message, pulse heavy in his ears. Behind him, a branch snapped. He spun but saw nothing except the shifting fog. The forest wasn't just watching him now. It was closing in, and the trail he had been following all along wasn't a discovery. It was a trap. Fog drifted through the shack's doorway in thin, pale bands. Elias stood still, rain dripping from his jacket, eyes locked on the message laid across the table. "Stop, before you end up like Hale." The words felt like a cold hand closing around his throat. Another branch snapped outside. Not wind. A footstep. He slid behind a shelf. Breath shallow. Hands tight around the camera, he still refused to drop. Through the slats of the wall, he saw movement, a figure sliding between trees, dark jacket blending with soaked bark. Then another, slightly taller, holding a long metal tool. Not guns, extraction instruments, silent things. They weren't searching, they were sweeping. Elias ducked low and crossed the shack in 3 quick steps. At the back wall, A narrow ventilation gap sat half buried in mud. He pulled at the panel. Rust crumbled. Metal bent. With a hard shove, it gave. He squeezed through and dropped into a drainage ditch behind the shack. Cold water swallowed his wrists, but the ditch offered cover. Above him, Boots stepped into the shack 2 sets, then 3. Voices murmured. He was here. Minutes ago. Check the ridge. Check the creek. He crawled the length of the ditch until it curved downhill, then slid out into a thicket of vine maple. The forest ahead was steep and slick, but he ran anyway, each breath stitching pain into his ribs. His pack bounced against his spine, the ledger, the photos, the only reason he couldn't stop. At the base of the slope he paused, palms on his knees, forcing air into his lungs. Rain fell harder now, turning the forest into a curtain of moving gray. He looked back once. Figures emerged from the brush, dark silhouettes scanning the ridge. They were tracking him without urgency, not rushing, not panicking. Professionals who had done this before. Elias turned and ran again. He cut west into a ravine where granite shelves crossed like fractured bones. The air smelled of wet rock and old moss. A narrow overhang provided quick shelter. He slipped underneath and listened. Nothing. Then faintly, just barely an echoing thud. Another. Something large, striking wood. A pattern. Elias recognized it instantly. A signal. Hail. Elias followed the sound uphill, weaving through fallen logs slick with rain. The forest grew darker as storm clouds thickened overhead. He reached a ledge overlooking a narrow valley, where the trees bent inward like an archway. Hail, he whispered. No answer, only the storm. He moved down carefully, boots digging into the soaked earth. When he reached the valley floor, he saw a shape slumped against a cedar trunk, broad shoulders, familiar jacket, hood torn. Marcus Hale. Elias rushed forward and crouched, blood-soaked Hale's sleeve. A deep cut marked his temple, but his eyes opened when Elias touched his shoulder. You made it, Hale said, voice ragged. What happened? They caught up sooner than I thought. Hale attempted a faint smile. I slowed them. Not enough. Elias pulled gauze from his kit and pressed it to Hale's arm. Hale winced, but stayed steady. Rain pattered gently across his legs. You found the shack, Hale said. So they're escalating. They already know I have the ledger. That's why you need to get out of here. Elias tightened the bandage, jaw clenched. I'm not leaving you. Hale breathed out slowly, the kind of breath a man gives when he's accepted something long ago. You need to hear me. That ledger, it's bigger than toxic waste. It ties into federal contracts, transport networks, men who hid behind uniforms for a decade. He looked directly at Elias. They'll bury you next to anyone who touches it. A shout echoed in the distance. Sharp. Urgent. Elias stiffened. Hale's hand closed around his wrist. They're sweeping this valley. Hale whispered. 3 minutes. Maybe less. What's the fastest way out? Hale pointed toward a narrow fissure in the rocks. There's an old wildlife corridor through that crack. It drops into a washout that leads west. Follow it for half a mile. You'll reach a fire road. Elias adjusted Hale's jacket and positioned him against the tree. Come on. You're coming with me. Hale shook his head once. I can't run anymore. And if you drag me, neither of us makes it. A second shout. Closer. Elias' pulse hammered. Hale touched the side of Elias' pack. What you're carrying is enough to expose this whole operation. Names? Routes? Payments? Everything I failed to bring forward. Rain gathered in the lines of his face. Don't let all of this end here. Elias swallowed hard, throat tight. I'm coming back for you. Hale gave the faintest nod. I know. Footsteps broke through the brush fast, controlled, cutting through the valley like knives. Elias slipped into the fissure and crawled through, body scraping stone. Behind him, voices rose. Hale's voice lifted once loud, deliberate. Over here! A diversion. Elias pushed faster, chest burning, rocks tearing at his sleeves. The crack widened suddenly, dropping into a tunnel carved by floodwater years ago. He slid down a slope of wet gravel and landed in a shallow wash. Branches snapped far behind. They'd taken the bait. He ran along the washout, water splashing around his boots. The corridor narrowed, then opened into a wide clearing where blackened stumps stood like skeletal sentries. The rain turned the ash into slick paste. He kept moving, eyes scanning for movement. A road marker appeared ahead, rusted, half bent. The fire road. Elias sprinted toward it. Mud splashed up to his knees. The forest thinned, and as he broke through the last line of trees, he saw something that made him stop cold. A truck, white, unmarked, parked diagonally across the road. Too late to turn back. The driver's door opened. Two figures stepped out, dark jackets, steady posture. Same silhouettes from the shack. Elias backed away, breath shaking. The taller figure raised a hand. Elias Calderon. Put the pack on the ground. Elias said nothing. The second figure stepped forward. You've documented sensitive areas, interfered with protected operations. This is classified work beyond your clearance. Elias almost laughed. Poisoning a watershed isn't classified. The first figure took another step. Rain dripped from his hood. Last warning. Something shifted behind the truck. A metal glint. Elias braced, ready to run, to fight. Anything. Then an engine roared. From behind a bend, a tan pickup burst onto the road, sliding sideways through mud. The driver leaned out the window, shouting, "Calderon! Move!" Elias recognized the face instantly. Ranger Deacon Holt, a quiet field officer from Bitterroot Station. A man who rarely spoke more than 5 words. A man who tracked things no one else noticed. The two figures spun toward the truck. One reached for his belt. Holt accelerated. "Get down!" he yelled. Elias dove as the truck slammed into the white vehicle, metal folding like tin. The impact echoed across the forest. One of the men tumbled into the ditch. The other staggered backward, grabbing his shoulder. Holt jumped from the cab, radio already pressed to his mouth. Echo 3, requesting immediate federal escalation. Calderon secured. Hostiles confirmed. Repeat. Hostiles confirmed. The injured man tried to rise. Holt aimed a flare launcher toward him, not lethal, but blinding. The flare shot skyward, exploding into harsh white light. The man fled into the trees. Holt approached Elias, eyes scanning him for injuries. "You're lucky I monitor unassigned frequencies. Someone pinged your device. They hacked it," Elias said. Holt nodded. "They hack everything." Elias caught his breath, vision spinning. Hail. Injured. Holt's expression hardened. "Well, get him. I've already sent coordinates upstream." Rain pounded harder, echoing through the trees like distant applause. Holt placed a firm hand on Elias' shoulder. "Whatever you found, whatever's in that pack, you hand it to the right people. Not the loud ones, not the local ones, the right ones." Elias nodded slowly. "It's enough to end them. Then, let's end them." A convoy of emergency vehicles emerged through the mist. Forest enforcement, Federal Environmental Task Group, and unmarked SUVs that carried people whose names never appeared on public rosters. As they closed in, Elias looked back at the forest. Dark, heavy, endless. Somewhere in that valley, Hale was still waiting. Somewhere in those crates lay a decade of hidden crimes, but not hidden anymore. Elias tightened his grip on the pack, and for the first time since the storm began, he stepped toward the road, not as a researcher, but as a witness. A witness carrying the truth.